prison breaks are a pretty rare event. When they do happen, almost all of the fugitives are recaptured. For example, in California, 98.5% of all escapees between 1977 and 2005 have been recaptured, most of the time within the first few hours or days after the escape. However, there are a handful of people who manage to get away from prison, get a new identity, and create a new life, often keeping their past a secret to those closest to them in their second life. Here are 7 prisoners who eluded capture for decades. Susan LeFevre, 30 years. In 1975, Susan LeFevre was arrested for selling a small amount of heroin to an undercover Michigan state trooper. She pleaded guilty and was given a sentence of 20 years at the Scott Correctional Facility in Wayne County, Michigan. 1 year and 19 days into her sentence, LeFevre climbed over a barbed wire fence and escaped. She was helped by her grandfather once she was outside the prison. With just some clothes, a toothbrush, and $200, LeFevre fled to California. Once there, she changed her name to Marie Day. She worked at odd jobs, but anytime she had to give her social security number, she was forced to quit. In 1984, 8 years after she escaped from prison, she met Ellyn Walsh and they married 10 months later. Over the next 22 years, they had 3 children and raised them in an upper-middle-class area of San Diego. Her new family wasn't aware of her past, but LeFevre knew from relatives in Michigan that the net was closing in on her. In April 2008, she was working in her garden when federal agents confronted her. She was arrested and sent back to prison in Michigan, where she spent 13 months before being released on parole. After her experience, she wrote a book, was interviewed by Oprah, and appeared on the Today Show. 4 to 5 years. On November 23, 1962, 19-year-old George Wright and 3 accomplices performed a series of armed robberies in the Ashbury Park area of New Jersey. In one of the robberies, a decorated World War II veteran was killed. Wright and his accomplices were arrested weeks later. In February 1963, he was given 30 years and sent to Leesburg State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey. 7 years into his sentence, Wright and 3 inmates were able to escape from prison. Due to poor prison security, Wright and his cohorts simply walked out the front gate and stole the warden's car. On the outside, they went to Detroit, where Wright and another escapee joined the Black Liberation Army bloc. As members of the BLA, Wright, dressed as a priest, along with 2 women and 2 men, boarded Delta Airlines Flight 841 heading to Miami. Once on board, Wright pulled a gun from the hollowed-out Bible he was carrying. In Miami, they demanded that the FBI give them $1 million, which they did. Wright and his accomplices then ordered the plane to fly to Boston to refuel, after which they flew to Algeria, where they were given sanctuary. Due to pressure from the United States, the Algerians confiscated the money and returned it to the American government, but they didn't turn over the fugitives. In May 1976, Wright's accomplices were arrested in Paris because they were carrying fake passports. They did 5 years in a French prison before being released in 1981. Wright remained free. Over 4 decades later, using fingerprint technology, the FBI matched Wright's prints to the identity card of a man named José Luis Jorge dos Santos, who was living a short distance from Lisbon, Portugal. Wright was arrested in 2011 after 41 years on the run. However, since he was an official Portuguese citizen at the time of his arrest, the Portuguese government refused to extradite him, and he remains free in Portugal. He wants to write a book or make a film about his life. 33 years. In 1954, 29-year-old John Kalasansky was sent to work on a prison farm in Green Springs, Ohio after he was convicted of being involved in a robbery at a convenience store in Cleveland. During the robbery, the store clerk was injured, but the wound wasn't fatal. Kalasansky was given a sentence of 25 years. He later said that he had no idea when he was going to get a chance to apply for parole, so in 1959, after 5 years in prison, he decided to escape. He fled the farm and was able to hitch a ride to Toledo. Once there, he changed his name to John Kalasansky, and he lived at the Salvation Army before securing a job as a truck driver. He cut all his ties from his past and never contacted his brothers, sisters, or even his son. 7 years after escaping from prison, he met the woman who would become his wife, then retired from his job sometime in the 1980s. It wasn't until December 11, 1992, 33 years after he escaped from prison, that Kalasansky's past caught up with him. The revelation shocked his neighbors and wife, who had no idea that he was a wanted fugitive. 34 years. In 1975, 22-year-old Paula Ellyn Carroll was sentenced to 5 years for theft and was sent to the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. 47 days into her sentence, Carroll escaped. It's still unclear how she escaped. She was there when a guard checked the sleeping inmates but was missing an hour later. Once on the outside, she adopted the name Sharon Edwards and used the social security number of a Sharon Edwards who lived in West Virginia. Carroll settled in Melbourne, Florida, where she met her husband and had 3 sons. As the years went on, she became a grandmother. That was until April 20, 2010, when Carroll was recaptured after 34 years on the lam. She was turned in by an anonymous tipster, who claimed that Carroll wasn't who she said she was. She spent 11 months in prison, was released in 2011, and has since reconnected with the family members with whom she lost touch after her prison break. Michael Morrow, 36 years. As a young man, Michael Morrow was arrested a number of times for robbery and fraud. In 1973, he was given a 5-year sentence for 2 counts of armed robbery. 4 years into the sentence, Morrow said that certain people in the prison wanted him dead. So, fearing for his life, the 34-year-old inmate scaled a prison fence at the California Institute for Men in Chino and escaped on August 27, 1977. At some point, he moved to Arkansas and changed his name to Carl Frank Wilson. In 1984, Morrow was arrested on suspicion of murder and his fingerprints were taken. At the time, databases weren't as good as they are now, so the police were not aware that Carl Wilson was actually the fugitive Michael Morrow. After he was cleared of the murder charges, he was released. However, in 2013, those fingerprints came back to haunt Morrow. It's unclear why, but the police finally matched the fingerprints and realized that Wilson was in fact Morrow. He was arrested on September 24, 2013, and charged with unlawful flight to avoid confinement. Morrow, who was 70 at the time of his arrest, said, "You've got me. I've been all around expecting this to happen." Donald Johnson, 36 years. In 1966, 22-year-old Donald Johnson was convicted of burglary and sentenced to a term of up to 15 years at Sierra Conservation Camp in Jamestown, California. He only stayed 6 months before breaking out and making his way to Florida. In 1969, he was arrested again for breaking and entering and given a 5-year sentence. The authorities in California were aware that Johnson was serving time in Florida, and they wanted a 60-day notice when he was going to be released. After his term, they would take him back into custody. However, they were never notified, and Johnson went back to living his life after serving 3.5 months in Florida. After getting out of prison, he left Florida, went to Arkansas, and got married. He kept his original social security number and name and moved to Tomball, Texas, where he landed a job at a chemical company. Over the next 21 years, he worked himself up the ranks there. Then, in 2004, after 36 years on the lam, the law caught up with Johnson and found the 60-year-old living with his ailing wife in a motor home. His wife of 28 years, who knew nothing about his escape, was devastated by the news, and Johnson was sent back to California. He served the remainder of his sentence and an extra 18 months for escaping before being released on parole. Ronald Carnes, 41 years. In November 1970, 25-year-old Ronald Carnes was convicted of robbing a convenience store with a gun. He was given a sentence of up to 20 years, but he escaped after only about 3. On the outside, Carnes got 2 different aliases, William Henry Cox and Louis Vance. Both were the names of 5-year-old boys who died in the 1940s. For years, Carnes lived in Washington state and worked as a deliverman for a company that processed mail and rebates for Office Max. He was even put in charge of collecting money for a parking garage that his boss owned. His boss later said that the books were always balanced and Carnes was one of his best workers. His boss also mentioned that Carnes wasn't very social. He didn't have many friends or family, although he was engaged for a short time. In 2013, Carnes moved to Iowa and applied for driver's licenses for both of his aliases. That turned out to be a mistake. The computer system at the Iowa Department of Transportation picked up the similarities between the pictures. Investigators then went to Carnes' apartment and found documents that indicated his true identity. He was arrested in April 2014 and charged with misuse of Social Security numbers because he applied for benefits under both names. However, those charges were dropped and the 69-year-old was sent back to serve his original sentence. He managed to stay free for an astonishing 41 years.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit a like and subscribe for more amazing content. We'll see you in the next one.